Okay. As I've been introduced, I'm Apostle Siboniso Ngobese. As I'm about to present, we can go to another slide, please. Now to this slide, as we can see here, the concept of religion and belief. African independent churches and Pentecostal churches. Now here I want us to briefly understand the African independent churches approach to theology, which is churches, those are churches that are founded based in African culture and biblical teachings. AICs believed the creator of heaven and earth, spoken out by the Bible in their own African culture. Before the missionaries introduced the Bible, AICs accepted the gospel without rejecting their culture, which is before the Bible was introduced to African independent churches. They believed God. So they were happy and welcomed the Bible because the God that was spoken in the Bible is the same God that they believed before the Bible was introduced to them. That's how they approached theology, because they saw the God that they knew, even though there was no Bible before. So that is how I would say African independent churches understood the coming or the introduction of the Bible to themselves. While Pentecostal churches approach to theology, those are churches that presumed themselves to have started on the day of Pentecost, when the apostles received power from on high. And Pentecostals believe the God of the Bible as the creator of heaven and earth. And they have their own style of worship, which developed through the years. So while they were coming into African independent churches understood them, although they saw a different style of worship and of doing things, which is not the same as what the AICs were doing, but also that created a little bit gap between the two. Although when times go on, they started to understand each other. So African independent churches and Pentecostal churches, they both have a zeal for God, even though they were different in their style of worship. But both of them, they had a zeal for God, and that made them to understand each other on a long run. Can we go to the other slide, please? So AICs respond to the gospel after the gospel was introduced to them by the missionaries. AICs received the gospel introduced by the missionaries and did not neglect their cultures. Even though the gospel was introduced, it was like a gospel with civilization. But the AICs, because of they understood God, they accepted the gospel. AICs had their own style of worshiping God, which developed when they received the Bible gospel. So they believed the Bible because what was written in the Bible is what also AICs were doing without knowing the Bible. One of the things, maybe, for example, that I can mention, that is the spirit of Ubuntu. AICs believed in the spirit of Ubuntu, which when they read the Bible, that's what also they found, that the Bible speaks more oftenly about the spirit of Ubuntu, humanity. Initially, AICs were spiritual in their style of worship, believing in healing and prophecies, and adopted the biblical teaching. In their response, the AICs, to the gospel, they had their own style, which they believed is a spiritual style of worshiping God, but also in their worship, biblical teachings was something that was not fully practiced before the Bible or before the missionaries or the Pentecostals brought the gospel to them. But when responding now, they started also to study and gain passion to know more about the teachings of the Bible. AICs started reading the Bible during their services in response to the receiving of the gospel. Can we go to the next slide, please? AIC's initial doctrine and biblical doctrine amalgamated. Now they're coming together of the two, since when the gospel was introduced to the AICs, there was the gap between the two, because Pentecostals, they brought the gospel, imposing to AICs that they need to, leave their cultures, their traditions, and that created a gap between the two. AICs believed that God is the creator of heaven and earth, proclaimed by the Bible. The same God that AICs initially believed before the Bible was introduced to them is the same God that they find in the Bible. So that made them to accept even the Pentecostals. They started to have that relationship. The AICs had their own culture of worshiping God, which in receiving the Bible doctrine, they did not neglect their culture of worship. They received the gospel while they were dancing as their style of worship, but now they were doing that now, receiving the gospel, preaching the Bible in their services, which was something that was not done before. AIC's doctrine believed the culture of humanity, which is Ubuntu, that is preached by the Bible doctrine. And you can find that in the book of Matthew 22, verse 37 until verse 40, where Jesus speaks about loving your neighbor as you love yourself. So AICs did practice that, and that alone made them to understand the Bible. Can we go to the other slide, please? AICs philosophy. AICs believe that having a relationship with God does not mean neglect their culture. Believing God to them was another way of growing in the knowledge of God that will make them live with other denominations, even if their styles of worship are not the same. Loving God to AICs means taking care of what God created, which is the earth that we are in. So they were always taking care of the world and the earth in their practices, believing the God that was brought also by the Pentecostals with the Bible. AICs believed that God is superior over all, and God does not change. The God that was brought to them is the same God that they believed, because they had this mind to say God is one, and it is God for everyone, the creator of heaven and earth and everything in it. Philosophy of AICs, denominational traditions and geographical cultures, does not hinder the knowledge of knowing God. They believe that. To say, even if we can be in different places, different countries, different styles of worshiping, but that does not hinder us to know God more. In other words, it means we all need to strive to know God. We need to make sure that we are fighting to know more about God without discriminating each other. For example, AICs discriminating the Pentecostals. But as we are all created by one God, then AICs believe that the same God does not change. Can we go to another slide, please? Now, AICs Development churches. AICs believe that worshiping God means living according to the Bible. After they adopted the Bible and the Bible confirmed what they were already practicing, the spirit of Ubuntu, how to live with your neighbor with love. Now they believed that we need to live according to the Bible, since they have adopted the Bible as the word of God. In the development of AICs, some adopted modern musical instruments in their worship services. Even in their singing, they adopted the modern way of singing, because to the AICs, it was a new way of worshiping God that was brought by the Pentecostals, the new way of styles that were brought by the Pentecostals. AICs, they used to worship without using instruments like your keyboards, but after adopting the Bible and they started to have relationship with the Pentecostals, now they also, some of them, adopted the styles of the Pentecostals in their worship, whereby now they were also using instruments like your keyboards in their worshiping, even adopted other music that was used by the Pentecostals. So it was something of their development. AICs developed into community centers after they received the Bible, because, as I said, AICs, they didn't study more the Bible, but after they received the Bible, that's when now they saw a need of having workshops. They started to take care of the community, which is something that they were doing in their own culture, in their own style of living. But now after they developed, they started now to do these things in a more professional way, whereby they will invite academics from different organizations, different departments to come and train or facilitate in their churches. They started to do charitable work, community development work, holistic community work, whereby they're working with the community, which was something that they were doing, but it grew more when they now started to have relationship with the Pentecostals, which were known that they were people of different culture from different countries, but that did not stop them to adopt some of the things that they introduced to them. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, Pentecostal churches and biblical teachings. Missionaries believed the teachings of the Bible, preached everywhere, even in our communities, establishing churches. Now, the Pentecostals, they started to preach everywhere in our communities, and that's where other AICs accepted them and knew about them, and they started to have Bible studies together, and AICs played a big role in influencing also some of the AICs. Pentecostal churches, while teaching the gospel, they compelled people to renounce their culture in order to follow their teachings. As I said, this also caused that gap that grew, but because of AICs believed the Bible, this gap was becoming now closed when times goes on. And Pentecostals brought a modern lifestyle while preaching their gospel, which is what AICs saw when they saw the Pentecostals churches. Can we go to another slide? Now here, the characteristics of Pentecostal churches. This is how AICs saw into the Pentecostals. This is how they judged them while they were approaching or they were starting churches in their communities. Because Pentecostals were known by their civilized style of worship and speaking in tongues, and they profess being saved in the name of Jesus. And in their introduction, they always started introducing themselves as people who are saved in the name of Jesus, which was something new to the Pentecostal, to the AICs. And that made AICs to have interest of knowing what is it that the Pentecostals are talking about. By that now, that made them to adopt the Bible, to study more the Bible in order to find out more about this Jesus, to find out more about the Pentecostals and their styles of worship. Because as the Pentecostals came with their civilized style, speaking in tongues, which is something also that the AICs were doing, but in a different way. So they wanted to know more. These people who are coming with something different, although it looked the same, but it was not the same. So they gained interest on that. Pentecostal churches hosted revivals in communities that made them to be known and noticed, especially with their new style and way of worship. So some of the AICs, they started now to leave their AICs churches and join the Pentecostal churches because they were known with their different styles of worship, with also their modern way or style of worship. So they attracted some of the AICs. And on that alone, as I've tried to tell you, that while that was happening, so there was a conflict between the two now. The AICs, they started to see the Pentecostals as people who are coming to destroy their churches, but also some because of the Bible, because AICs believed the Bible, that is, it is the word of God. So some of them, that's why they started to neglect the AICs churches and joined the Pentecostals, because they believed the Bible, while those who were left, they only received the Bible and they didn't adopt even the styles of the Pentecostals in their worship. But what they did, they just received the Bible and they introduced the Bible in their worshiping services. Pentecostals started Bible classes, home cells, crusades, revivals, teaching about the Bible. And that played a big role also because some of the AICs started to join these Bible classes, these home cells, to gain more knowledge. And some of the AICs were saved in these crusades or revivals that were hosted by the Pentecostals. So the gospel grew now in our communities, whereby Pentecostal churches were growing and also AICs churches were growing, and some adopting the styles of the Pentecostals, but not joining them. Can we go to another slide? So here it is the contrast of Pentecostal churches and African independent churches. Pentecostal churches, they came with a modern style of worship without uniform, but with decency and civilization. While Pentecostals, while they were introducing their gospel and their different style of worship with civilization, AICs, they worshipped in uniforms and integrity. So it was part of their way of worship to wear uniform. And in them, that means we are all equal. No need to start discriminating each other, for example, because of our different ways of dressing in their services. So that's why they introduced a uniform in their worship services. And as spiritual churches also, their uniform came as prophecy to their churches, and which they also confirmed when they adopted the Bible, that does not hinder them to know God, because they believed that they are spiritual churches which now adopted the Bible that confirms what they are practicing. Pentecostal churches, they had healing and miracle performed by laying on of hands without substance, while African independent churches, they prophesy, they had healing services, miracles performed by laying on of hands and with substances, like in their services or in their miracle services, they will have candles whereby they will light them, or they will bless water and give the sick people to drink that water, and people were getting healed. So the two, they were all spiritually, but AICs, they had substances, while Pentecostals, they were doing their healing without substances. Pentecostals' most dominating activity was Bible sermons, Sunday schools, home cells, and crusades. They were known by that to the AICs. And AICs, healing and deliverance, prophesying, and short Bible sermon and night vigils, because after they received the Bible was not something that was known more to them. They were known by their prayer sessions, their night vigils, where they will have services the whole night praying for the sick. They will just read a few verses in the Bible, and then it will be prayer time, whereby all those who are sick, they will be prayed. And if in their belief, those who are prophesying will maybe pray for the water and give those who are sick, and it was believed that that alone will make those people to be healed, and that's what was happening. So this is few points to just show the difference between the two while they were trying to work together, the Pentecostals and the African Independent. Can we go to another slide, please? The collapse of Pentecostal churches and African Independent churches. Civilization in the course of time inspired the combination of the two types of denominations to eradicate ungodly gap betwixt. AICs adopted the Bible and performed many activities based on the Bible teachings and perceived themselves same as Pentecostals in fearing God, in studying God, and in worshiping God. They are all the same despite their nationality, geographical culture, and traditions. So, in closing the gap between the two, the Bible played a very important role between the two, because they started now to work together despite their geographical cultures or traditions and their nationalities, but they started now to work together. The philosophy without denominational traditions, which is not based on the geographical culture. Now every nation can now be proud of their nationality while studying about God, to know Him. The spirit of Ubuntu brought godliness between the two denominations, which are now working hand in hand with each other for the gospel's sake. So they started to accept each other. They started to close that gap that they had before the Bible was introduced, especially to the AICs. Can we go to the next slide, please? The zeal of God upon Pentecostal churches and AICs and the development. The love of God and the knowledge of God in both denominations brought them together in community work and in public in general. Pentecostal churches and AICs started conferencing together in church activities, crusades, community development. They started to tolerate each other in their denominational differences. Faith-based organizations have been established where PCs and AICs work together with the government departments in community development, work organizing community workshops for HIV and AIDS, community cleaning campaigns, environmental workshops, civic education workshops, even COVID-19 workshops, especially since we are facing this pandemic at this present moment. So they started to work together now without discriminating each other. Both ACs and PCs, in their zeal for God, wanted to enjoy life here on earth filled with love, peace, growing in their knowledge of God. So knowing God to them made them to understand that they need to take care of the earth as earth keepers, and they need to grow in the knowledge of knowing God in order for them not to create a gap between the two. Despite their different styles and cultures. Can we go to the next slide? Working together. Now, AICs and PCs, inspired by fearing God, they started to understand that working together means loving God and His creation, taking care of the earth as earth keepers. As they work together, they started to grow their knowledge by hosting seminars, professional leadership workshops for empowerment and development. They studied together in Bible schools, colleges, universities, growing their knowledge of God. And it must be known that working together of ACs and PCs is a new development among them that is still growing. They are still trying to work together without any gap between them. As I said, that some, they understood them, they welcomed the Pentecostals, but the gap somehow is still there, even though they accepted the Bible. Can we go to another slide, please? Which is my ending, to say, in their working together, I would love to say this is a growing thing that needs us to try always and believe God that these gaps will be closed when times goes on. I thank you all for this opportunity. I tried to at least manage time, but I've got more to tell on my lecturing. And thank you all for your time to listen to this. And God bless you.
Thank you very much, Apostle Ngobese, for this highly knowledgeable lecture. And I'm sure there will be lots of questions, but I want to take the opportunity to ask the first question. And my question are actually two questions. The first question is, your church, Gilgal Bible Church,
yes,
would you say it is an independent church or a Pentecostal church? So this is the one question that I have. And the second question is whether you could talk a little bit, I mean, seeing that your church is located in an informal settlement between Johannesburg and Pretoria, and you know, that comes with all kinds of challenges in the form of infrastructure and all these issues that informal settlements bring with them. Maybe you can outline a little bit the kind of work that you do in cooperation with other actors, with other organizations, other actors in Carlfontein, in the area that you are located in, that your church is located in. So two questions. The first one on whether your church is Pentecostal or independent, and then second, the kind of work that you do with other actors in your area, the kind of cooperation that you are engaged in.
Okay, I thank you for your question. Yeah, and I wanted to have more on that, but because I tried to manage time, you know, I think that's what I brought to my slides, just to manage time, because I saw I was given 1 hour and I thought maybe there would be that 10 minutes for
Right.
questions, but I've got more. So to answer the question, the first question, Gilgal Bible Church is a Zion Pentecostal church, which is founded in South Africa by Apostle Ngobese, which is me. So now, Gilgal Bible Church adopted the styles of Pentecostals and also our root as AICs. So and it goes to our next question, because in our area where Gilgal Bible Church is based, we've got different types of people from different areas. We've got people from Malawi, we've got people from Zimbabwe, we've got people from Lesotho, we've got people from South Africa. So we tried to accommodate everyone without limiting them with the style of worship. That is why Gilgal Bible Church, when you come in, you'll find that we are a Pentecostal Zion church, which is Zion is the church that is having their uniform when they worship, and the Pentecostal, they just wear maybe their suits or their clothes in a decent way. So we combined the two. And also that helped us a lot because our church grew in both sides, grew in a Pentecostal way and also in a Zion style. And we combined the two. And in our area, where, especially in Calfontaine, we started to work with different organizations. I remember that 4 years back, I was a secretary in a sector from government, which is FBO, faith-based organization, which is an interfaith. So I was a secretary in our region. So we work with different stakeholders in our communities, your justice department, your health department, your social development. We started that relationship, especially in assisting our communities as our place is a place whereby there are more needy people in our community. So we started things like feeding scheme, things like crèches whereby fees will be lesser, especially in our churches. As I'm talking now, in our church, we are running a soup kitchen whereby every weekend, because it's a new thing for now, because of COVID, every weekend, children in our community, they will come to Gilgal Bible Church and we will try to feed them. But also during 2020 last year, because COVID was too high then, and we started to get support from different organizations whereby we gave people in our communities food parcels. Yes, I thank you. I think I have answered. I don't want to be long.
Thank you very much, Apostle. Yes, wonderful answer. Thank you very much. And I would like to open up the floor for additional questions.
Okay.
Marie-Louise, yes.
Yes, thank you very much, Apostle Ngobese, for this presentation and also for telling us a little bit more on your own church, which not everybody is familiar with. Now that you outlined the relationship and also the change of the relationship between Pentecostals and African independent churches, what would you say is the relationship between these churches and the so-called mainline churches? Because you said, well, there was also already a belief before the Bible was brought, also by missionaries, and now there are these mission-initiated churches also. And what would you say? What is the relationship between the churches you now spoke about and these other churches? Because my impression is sometimes that there was also like the one looking down on the other, but what is your impression on that relationship?
Okay. Thank you, Mariluz. The relationship, I would say, is growing from bad to better, because Pentecostal churches were known as, if I may put it, as people of modern style, people who are living a better life, driving their nice cars, you know, people who, in our community, people who are speaking better English, people who are offering more money in their churches, you know. So, and people who were, as I said in my in my presentation, that they were known of their introduction to say they are saved in the name of Jesus, and imposing, I would say imposing, because I think it only came now whereby they started to understand that to win a person, you need to have a strategy, not just to hammer the person. So they will say people need to neglect their cultures, their traditions, and that created that gap. That is the gap that is still there to some of the mainline churches or African independent churches. But I must say it that because of these faith-based organizations that they started to bring together these different churches, different denominations in one roof, they started to tolerate each other. So I would say the relationship is growing, and we trust God that the gap needs to be closed. That's why now we can, there are crusades, there are revivals that you'll find are organized by both of these different denominations. That shows that they are trying to close that gap. Thank you.
Thank you, Apostle. Deidre.
Thank you very much, Philip. Thank you, Apostle Siboniso.
Yes.
I'm pleasantly surprised. Thank you very much for your presentation, very informative. And I'm very pleasantly surprised to hear about the relationship between the I know them as the ZCC, but you just gave the new name. And between Pentecostal, I actually know the ZCC quite well, brought up in the environment where I've seen the church community, especially the women with a uniform, every day, very committed, very ritual focused, but very committed and loyal community. So I'm so surprised to hear that you say that the relationship between Pentecostal and ZCC, and that to me speaks volumes about the relationship building and the willingness to reach out to one another. And the fact that the name, you also said in the Z, you also have Pentecostal name within the ZCC, is that correct?
No, it's not correct. Okay.
Sorry, yes, please go.
Yeah, I was saying that my style of worship, we've got that big church, which is ZCC, Zion Christian Church. That one is different from my Zion style. The ZCC, Zion Christian Church, is the one that they've got their badge and they've got their own style of worshiping. Okay, but also there are AICs, and we've got those ones that are Zions, which were founded by one of our elders, Ubaba Unkonyane, years back, and that grew until our generation, whereby now we adopted the style of Pentecostals. But the ZCC that you are mentioning, they've got their own style, and I believe they didn't adopt the style of Pentecostals because they've got their own way and all that. But our Zion style, some of our Zions, they are now adopting Pentecostal styles in such a way that we are having a good relationship with the Pentecost and the main lines. Although I must say it, not all of us or not all of our churches. As I said that, you know, when something new was introduced, it takes time for it to be accepted fully. Sorry for that.
Thank you. Thank you very much for answering that. Just one more question. In terms of the culture that you've mentioned, that they still practice the culture, some traditions within the culture, within the worship. Can you just maybe elaborate a little bit or just give an example of what of a cultural tradition that they do practice as saviors, if I can put it that way, as being saved? So one example of the tradition in the culture.
Okay, thank you. The culture, for example, it is the way of living or the style of living. So in their worship, they will chant and dance. That is their culture of worship. They will round like Zions, they will round singing without instrument and all that. And when they received the style of Pentecost, they now combined the two, which is they will still round or chant and dance without playing maybe instruments. And also in other songs, they will sing songs that were sang by the Pentecostals, and they will also play instruments in their worship services. And some, they believed that, for example, in their worship, a woman needs to wear a dress. So things like that, they didn't change them when they accept the Bible. Instead, they saw the Bible supporting their culture. So that's one of my examples to say in their culture of worship, they will allow women to wear long dresses, covering their head with a cloth, which is also a culture that they were doing before receiving the Bible. And only to find that somewhere in the teachings of the Bible, it also confirms their practices. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Apostle. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Apostle. I have one question. I have one question on my own, or from myself, from my own. Okay, the day has been long. One question, in any case, that relates to the multilinguality and you know the kind of multicultural congregation that you have with worshippers from Malawi, from Zimbabwe, and I was wondering whether you've experienced this issue of xenophobia in your area, and yeah, whether this is an issue in your area. And
okay, thank you, Philip. Yeah, well, with this issue of xenophobic in our area, didn't affect our church, because I must say it, as I'm in Calfontein. So in our area, didn't take place that. It was far, like in other places like Alexandra. So unfortunately, we were safe. Although when we talk of xenophobic, also you must remember that people are not the same. Some maybe will have that spirit in their hearts, but not show it. But in our churches, that is why the major law in the Bible of love your neighbor as you love yourself. It's one also of the things that makes us to unite as different people from different countries. So it makes us to understand that it is not by who you are, where you're coming from, but we are all created by God, and we need to love one another. Thank you.
And if I may ask another question that relates to your work, you are familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, I know, and I was wondering whether you have whether you would think the Agenda 2030, the Sustainable Development Agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals, is that the relevant agenda that can guide your work, or should development be broader in a sense, also including spirituality and so forth?
Okay, thank you, Philip. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, especially when it comes to religious communities. Remember, to AICs, this is something that they were doing, but without professional knowledge, that is taking care of the earth, planting trees, doing awareness campaign, cleaning awareness campaign in our communities. So I think we still need more ways to improve or teach our leaders when it comes to sustainable development plan, especially 2030, so that they can get involved in assisting with their time, with their knowledge, and also with their prayers, because we believe that in everything that we do, we need to put God first. So I will say more workshops are needed for our leaders. And remember, if a workshop starts with a leader, then it will go down to the church. And when we talk of a church now, we're talking of a community, because members of the church are the members of the community. When trainings start with leaders, our duty as leaders is also to influence our members going down to the community. So I support this plan of 2030, and I'm willing to get more involved by God's grace. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Apostle. I don't know if there are further questions. I think this has been a really exciting evening, and I see that Deidre, you can come in now, is also asking for your contact. So if you're willing to share your contact in the chat, I think that would be very helpful for others to engage. Deidre, yes.
Yes, no, thank you. You've asked it.
Okay.
Since I'm also in South Africa, it will be great if we can engage further. And I've also just started my research, so it will be nice to see if we could collaborate on some of the matters, if that's okay. Thank you. Thanks, Philip.
Great, wonderful. Any further questions or comments? No, then in that case, I have the privilege of thanking you once again, Apostle Ngobese, for this highly insightful and knowledgeable lecture. Really greatly appreciated. And we are delighted to have had you in Berlin virtually this evening. And we look forward to hosting you in Berlin in person at another opportunity.
Thank you.
A good evening to all of you, and yeah, greetings to the Church, Apostle Ngobese, greetings to your colleagues, to your congregants, and we hope to see you again in person soon.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to everyone, and have a good evening. God bless you.
Thank you, and God bless you.
Amen.